So my pastor, Dr. Joel James, has been faithfully teaching the Word of God for more than 25 years in the same church. And in this time, he read a lot of Christian books on marriage and taught annual marriage counseling classes and counseled many engaged and married couples. And he told me that his favorite book on marriage is Love That Lasts by Gary and Betsy Ricucci. He said that it has blessed his marriage and that he recommends every Christian couple should read it every year. So I thought that I must get this book and read it for myself. And that's exactly what I did. And wow, his words could not be truer. It's been a great blessing and help to my marriage. The reading style of this book is fun and to the point, which I super appreciate. And it has a good balance between a biblical understanding of marriage and practical tips to put that biblical understanding of marriage into practice in the real world. And since then, we started this channel, Books of the Wise, and I thought by myself that I must certainly read through this book again and summarize all of its wisdom so that I may learn from it again and my wife may benefit from me making better marriage decisions, but also so that you may benefit from it and your marriages may be blessed by it. So, whether you need a marriage refresher or need to make some drastic changes in your marriage, I read Love That Lasts a second time and summarized all of its great content in this video, and it's coming up. Now, before I run through the content of this great book, let me just take a few seconds to introduce the authors to you. Yes, you heard right, authors. This book was authored by Gary and Betsy Ricucci. Gary is the pastor of Sovereign Grace Church of Louisville, Kentucky, and together they have 35 years of experience serving engaged and married couples through small groups, counseling, seminars, and conferences. Gary is the main author of the book, but every now and then his wife would be writing addressing the women. This is a fun writing style and quite helpful to get the women's perspective on marriage as well. Betsy Ricucci is also C.J. Mahaney's sister, which might be a point of reference for some of you. Now, let's take a look inside of the book. Chapter 1 is really the introduction of the book, and the Ricuccis asks the readers to reread this chapter when they are done with the book because it has some helpful closing thoughts. Thus, I'll leave chapter 1 for the end of the video. Suffice to say for now, they ask the reader to think carefully about what makes for a biblical marriage. So maybe pause the video and write down and think a bit, what makes a marriage a biblical marriage? We'll get back to chapter 1. Chapter 2 deals with the role of the husband, leading with love. First, he proves that roles in marriage is good and created by God, referencing the Bible. He says that roles are seen in the Garden of Eden, thus they are created by God. And God kept Adam responsible to keep the garden. And Adam also got the responsibility to name his wife, showing that he has leadership over her. Eve was created, on the other hand, to be Adam's helper. And roles are also not only seen in the Garden of Eden before sin even came into the world, but also in 1 Corinthians chapter 11 verse 3. Let me read that for you. He says here, "But I want you to understand that the head of every man is Christ. The head of a wife is her husband, and the head of Christ is God." And therefore, just like the head of Christ is God and the head of a man is Christ, in the same way, the head of a wife is her husband. We thus see here that roles in the Trinity are perfectly good. It does not mean that the Father is superior to Christ, but we do see that they do have different roles. The Father is the head, the leader, the authority over the Son. We never see the Son sending the Father or the Father obeying the Son, but we do see the Son obeying the Father and the Father sending the Son. So thus we see, even in the Trinity, there are different roles, different functions that they have to fulfill, but they are equal in value. And in the same way, a husband is the head of his wife. They are equal in value, but they have different roles, and that is good, and that is how God designed it. We also see that roles are seen in many aspects of our world today, like in business, sports, entertainment, government, and the military, and even education. Those roles are a reflection of God's very best. Since God created it, it does not come from sin or culture, and it reflects Christ and the church. So, what is the husband's role in marriage? Well, some men think that their basic function in marriage is just to earn the money, mow the lawn, and supervise the remote control. But it's not. In fact, Ricucci said that if you know what God requires of men, you are going to want to quit. God requires much of men, and they surely need God's help for the task. In summary, a husband has two responsibilities. They have to love and to lead. And the main passage that describes a husband's role is found in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 25 to 33. Now, I think many Christians have already heard this text, but it is very helpful to read through it again. And Ricucci said that you should memorize it and meditate on it and never presume that you practice it well enough. So let me now take time and read through it again, and let's see how it describes a husband's roles. It says, "Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. In the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church, because we are members of his body. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh." Now, the first point that Gary Ricucci makes on how a husband should fulfill his role on loving his wife from his text is he says he should love her graciously. Think of the grace that Christ has shown. It's undeserving for the sinful mankind, but Christ showed this grace. On page 36, he makes one of my favorite quotes in the book, and I just want to read that quickly for you. Page 36 on how a husband should love her graciously. He says, "No one on earth should experience more of my generosity, respect, kindness, sacrifice, and gratitude than my wife. If someone asked your wife, 'How do you know your husband loves you?' what would she say? Why don't you ask her? She should be able to provide a list of thoughtful, creative, and consistent expressions of your love. What can you put on her list today?" Very, very helpful to think through those practical elements of loving your wife. He also says from Ephesians 5 that a husband should love his wife sacrificially. Remember, Christ gave his life for the church. For example, if you know your wife needs your help in the kitchen or with the kids, you sacrifice relaxing time on the couch and go ask your wife, what could you be helping her with? That's loving her sacrificially. Also, you need to love your wife redemptively. In Ephesians chapter 5, he says, washing her with the word. And Christ came to redeem the church. And so, husbands, practically, do you talk about Christ? Do you read the Bible? Do you take your wife to church? Also, 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 7 adds to what Ephesians chapter 5 says. And it says that a husband should live with his wife in an understanding manner. So how do you do that? Well, practically, you listen to your wife, you ask questions, you try to understand who she is, knowing she is different from you and also has perspectives and emotions. But ladies, here's just a word of caution that Betsy Ricucci added at this text, and this is that ladies should not abuse this. Ladies should not say, well, if my husband really understood me, he wouldn't have, or he would have. No, that's not what it means here. This is a command to the husbands to understand their wives, and ladies, they have a different role. Now, also, 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 7 says that a husband should show honor to his wife, lest his prayers won't be heard, right? So love her with honor her, talk about her in private and in public with respect, show her that she is valuable even in the sight of others. Do not grumble about your wife or complain about her. Now that's the first aspect of your role as husband, namely to love your wife. But the second one is to lead the marriage. Now this does not mean that the husband must make every decision or must initiate every aspect of the home, but it does mean that overall he takes the responsibility to lead as head of the house. Husbands must take the responsibility for difficult decisions in the home. And Gary said that when it comes to making family decisions, some men dictate in that they are all bossy and do not gently communicate their decisions and get their wife's input, but other men abdicate in that they postpone difficult decisions for as long as possible, and they never actually make a decision due to the difficulty of the task. And he said that in his experience, the abdicators are far more common. So watch out for that one, men. Do not abdicate difficult decisions, whether it is making decisions going for medical checkups, deciding the budget, moving insurance, or choosing how you will serve in church. Whatever decision there is to make sure a decision is made. Even if you don't know the answer, then say, I don't know, and ask your wife for input, and if she doesn't know, then go and do research. But make sure the decision gets made. Don't pass the burden of making a difficult decision to your wife, or worse yet, the burden that no decision gets made. Make sure a decision is made. Now, chapter 3 deals with the role of the wife, and it can be summarized as respectfully submitting. And this section was written by Betsy Ricucci. And the key verse that she quotes is Proverbs 14 verse 1. And let's look at that together. So Proverbs 14 verse 1 says, the wisest of women builds her house, but folly with her own hands tears it down. And thus the key role of the women in the house is to build it. Build her house. Build your house. And so ladies, at the end of a long day, when it feels like you've really accomplished nothing, then you can measure your success by asking, did I invest in the good of my house? A woman can also break down her house by many subtle ways, like hurtful words and neglecting the kids or her husband, right? So watch out for that, ladies. Wives specifically build the relationship with their husband by fulfilling the role of respectfully submitting, according to Ephesians 5, verse 22 to 24. Let me just quickly read that. Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, his body, and is himself its Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit in everything to their husbands. Now, Betsy gives a few thoughts on how a wife can fulfill this role of respecting her husband. And first of all, she says she should use respectful thoughts. So ladies, it starts with how you think about your husband. Do you think about him as an honorable person? Also, respectful words. How respectfully do you talk with your husband in private, in public, and to others? What does he do well? What is he good at? What did he achieve? Then tell him how much you respect him for those things verbally. Men thrive on that, ladies. Also, respectful deeds. Do you do things that shows him that he is valuable and honored in your eyes? Here are 3 thoughts from Ephesians 5 verse 22 to 24 on the wife's role on submission. Well, first of all, it says that the wife should submit to their husbands in everything. And obviously this does not mean when your husband requires of you to do sin, and men should not abuse this, but rather focus on their role of loving their wives. But it does say in everything, and that's something that's supposed to guard the wife and push the husband up to take that responsibility of leading. This does also not mean inequality, but it is a functional role you can take in. Remember what we said, that even Christ submits to the Father, and that does not mean inequality, but difference of roles, and it's good. And it also does not mean that the wife does not have influence and should not help. Remember, Jezebel, in an evil way, had a lot of influence over King Ahab, right? And Eve helped her husband and used her influence, in a sense, negatively. But it just shows a wife has a lot of influence, and it's not wrong. It should be used. A wife has that ability to change the husband's decision by just respectfully submitting and asking if she can also give her opinion and help. And many times a husband changes his decision. So a wife really has a lot of influence there. Now, here are 5 ways in which wives can practically show love to her husbands. First of all, pray for him and with him. A husband feels so much strengthened if he knows that his wife is praying for him. Secondly, learn to understand him, ask him questions, hear how he feels and thinks. Thirdly, communicate in ways that serve him. 4, demonstrate physical affection to him, right? A husband loves to be touched and feel loved in that way. 5, enjoy shared activities with him. Now, Betsy gave the example of how she learned to show interest in the Air Force because of Gary's interest, right? So she initially didn't have any interest in the Air Force, but because her wife had interest, she showed interest, and later it even became something that she was interested in. Now, also Proverbs 31 is like the key chapter for ladies on how to be excellent in being wives. Now, many ladies feel condemned by Proverbs 31, but Betsy showed that this is not meant to keep the standards super high and make all ladies feel weak and that they do not measure up, but it is meant to inspire ladies. This also does not mean you have to learn to sew like that lady in Proverbs 31. Betsy, for example, said that she does some things that's unconventional for ladies, like mowing the lawn. And so Proverbs 31 doesn't say you have to do all those things, but it just shows a lady that works hard and that places her family first. And so ladies, go and read Proverbs 31 and let that inspire you to be a more excellent wife. And note, Proverbs 31 is about being the excellent wife, not the perfect wife. So do not feel condemned by that and trust the Lord for grace. Now, the next chapter deals with relational intimacy. And Genesis chapter 2 verse 18 is the key verse for that. Let me read that for you. It says, "Then the Lord God said, it is not good that the man should be alone. I will make him a helper fit for him." So God created the wife to be a helper. He said, it's not good that man should be alone. I'll make him a helper. But we have all experienced a relationship that is a bit cool or distanced, or perhaps too hot when anger crept in. Sin distorted our relationship even in the Garden of Eden. And so we need to fight and pursue this relationship intimacy with our wives in order for us to have this good in the marriage. And so we should not assume or even pretend that everything is good. If your wife is a bit cool, don't say, that's just her. We need to pursue that relationship union again. And we need to do that by having honest and open communication with each other. Also, we need to have a whole lot of humility. And that's primarily revealed by just listening to your wife with undivided attention. We need to commit to grow in grace and have regular spiritual discourse. Many couples had a lot of this spiritual discourse during their courtship, but over the years, it faded away. Now, Gary asked the question, what prevents spiritual discourse? Why aren't you talking about God as you always did? And here are some convicting reasons that might be the case for you. Maybe you are worshiping efficiency or productivity at the expense of regular conversations about God, His Word and His ways, right? What are you prioritizing there? Or second one is maybe worldliness, because we tend to talk about what is interesting for us and what is on our minds. What's on your mind? Is it the Bible and God or the latest things of the world? And listen to this quote. He says, "Men, there will be no progress in leading and loving your wife if you fail to fellowship with God. In my experience, healthy and growing marriages are invariably led by men who are consistent and intentional in their pursuit of God. Struggling marriages usually are not. It's just that simple," unquote. So basically he's saying, if you are pursuing God with your whole heart, your marriage will also probably be good, right? And if you're not pursuing God, then your marriage will suffer for it. It's just that simple. Now, the next chapter deals with communication. And the Ricucci here offers 5 helpful thoughts on communication. First of all, men and women are different by design. Generally, women are more interested in people, like the children, and men are more interested in things, like the latest technology. Men want the highlights and women care about the details. For example, a new baby. A man just sees there's a baby, but the woman wants to see how big is the nose, how big are the ears, how much does he weigh. Men are also more objective and women are more subjective or intuitive. The thing is, no matter how much a man just wants his wife to just think more like him and act more like him because he thinks like this, a woman won't. A woman is made differently by God, and a man would do much better than trying to get her to change and be like him than to embrace these differences as something created by God and to celebrate that and to get her perspective. Second tip on communication is that communication should take variety. And so he lists a whole lot of types of communication in the book. For example, small talk, information sharing, value sharing, correction, spiritual conversations, self-disclosure. And a good marriage should flow naturally from one form to the other. And a problem with communication between a husband and a wife often comes in when the husband wants to, for example, have a spiritual conversation and the wife wants to do information sharing. And then their minds and hearts are at 2 different places. And this communication challenge can be solved by always being aware of it and choosing to first listen to what is on your spouse's heart before bringing up what is on your heart. Now, a third tip on communication that they are sharing is you need to make time to talk. So, for example, don't masquerade laziness as fatigue. Oh, I'm too tired to talk about this right now. Now, granted that there are better and worse times to talk, so wives don't abuse this, and husbands, you also be aware of it. But if it's a really bad time to talk, then schedule for a better time. Don't just postpone it so that it never happens. And husbands, you take the leadership with that. For example, when you're both in bed or on your way to work or just came home from work, those are generally not the best times to talk because you're tired or you just need to go to work now and it's not a good time to talk things through. So don't bring up those difficult topics, but rather, husbands, take the responsibility if your wife wants to speak about something then to schedule for a better time. And don't put off talking about something because it will also expose who you really are, right? He calls it pride cowering in the shadows. So be willing to open up even about those difficult topics, even if it's going to show that you are not as good as you thought. And also don't disguise selfishness as inability. For example, talking it's just not one of my strengths, or that's just not the type of person who I am. Other people like to talk, but I'm more like a quiet introvert. That's disguising selfishness as inability. Now, fourth tip on communication is he says, make sure communication happens regularly. Write to each other, talk often, plan for when you get back from work. So many times that first greet when you get back from work sets the mood for the rest of the evening. Okay? Also, make sure you spend time with each other, especially in the busy seasons, right? When the seasons are busy, very, very busy, then you need to make time to talk and plan for it. Also, guard communication time from TVs or cell phones or even children. Okay? Guard that time. Don't go to a restaurant where there are TVs or when you're in view of a TV. Okay? Guard your communication time. And then fifth tip on communication. Encouragement and correction should be a natural part of your communication. Hebrews chapter 10 verse 24 says that we should encourage each other. And ladies, many of you are thinking, well, if I'm encouraging him in this area, then he'll think that he has arrived in all areas and is perfect and doesn't have to work on anything. But that's a wrong way of thinking. Go and encourage your wife. If you see something that he's doing well, encourage him. Now, we all need correction because we all have blind spots. But make correction part of fellowship, not of conflict. So it should be a regular part, not only when you're busy fighting and now you're bringing up all those bad things. Make it a part of your everyday conversation. Correction should be part of that. Correct one another with a desire to serve. That's also very important. When you correct someone, don't just correct them because you you're fighting or something, correct them trying to help them. That should be your mentality. Now, the next chapter deals with handling conflict. And it's important, first of all, to think about conflict in this way. Conflict is given by God as a trial to grow us in our faith. Right? So next time when you have a conflict, think about that, right? It's a trial given by God to grow you in your faith. Every conflict rightly handled can bring us closer to God and to each other. That we should just not avoid conflict at all costs, but we should rightfully work through it, knowing that it comes from the hand of God. It's tough, but it's good for us. But also, on the other hand, conflict wrongly handled can push us away from each other and away from God. So every conflict has that opportunity to bring you closer to God or away from God. Now, Gary mentions that there are 7 stages of a conflict growing and growing. And at each stage, the husband must choose to respond right or wrong. And if he responds wrong, it gets worse and worse. So the first stage is a husband or a wife desires something. They want something. Maybe they want just a little bit of rest when the husband comes back from work, or the wife just wants the husband to take care of the kids for a moment, right? So you want something. They want something. Secondly, disagreement or disappointment. So the husband doesn't take care of the kids, or the husband doesn't get that rest that he wants. Then it goes over to deserving. I deserve this rest. I've worked hard for you. Or the wife says, I deserve that you take care of the kids. I've spent time with them the whole day. Then dependence. It's like you're depending on this rest as if it's super important. Then deification, you make it your God and saying, if I don't get this, I will sin because it's so important for me that I just get this bit of rest or get you to take the kids, right? And then it leads to destruction. You start fighting this conflict, mean words, just because you went from a desire to a deification, to making it your God. Now, often conflict goes through these several stages before it results in disaster. But certain couples get to disaster so fast because of the amounts of conflicts that they had, that they handled in bad ways and have responded badly to them. But it is helpful to know some of these stages so you can prevent it from growing as early as possible, right? And so try to catch that conflict before it grows bigger and bigger. Now, how should we handle conflict? First of all, understand what true peace is and is not. That's vital to handling conflict. True peace is not just the absence of conflict, but you still just avoid each other and don't talk to each other. That's like the peace between South and North Korea. No, true peace is an open relationship where both parties are free to communicate with each other and build unity. Secondly, recognize and confess sin. So do not just brush sin off as, that's just a weakness or something, just so there's peace again. No, you have to recognize sin and you have to confess it and deal with it before true peace can result. Also, you need to forgive when sin and ask for forgiveness, forgive and follow up. And that follow up was very interesting and helpful. So after both parties, the one party asked for forgiveness, the other party granted forgiveness, make sure you follow up a day or two later. Hey, is this matter settled now? What can we learn about it? How can we make sure it doesn't happen again? That's normally a very difficult thing to do, but husband, I encourage you to do that. 2 days after you and your wife have reconciled and forgiven each other, make sure you follow up. Not to be angry at each other again, but to learn from that experience and to make sure that it is fully settled. Also, on handling conflict, make use of the church. And Gary here did something that I think every husband should do. He assured his wife that if he would ever be not leading the marriage in a godly manner or not loving his wife as he should, then she, Betsy, should be free to go to the church elders and get them involved. And he assured her that he would not take offense or see it as interference of his leadership. And I think, and he suggests, that every Christian husband should do the same thing. But then, after doing that, men, still be the first to seek help from mature couples in the church or your pastor if you can't seem to work through an issue. Don't place that burden on her. Now, the next chapter deals with romance. And he says here, it never has to get old. Okay? So many couples think our romance is just for the initial phases of your marriage, but no, it never has to get old, even to your 60s, 70s. It can just be more beautiful than ever. Now listen to Gary's definition of romance. Romance is telling your wife in as many consistent and creative ways that she is the most precious and important and desirable person you will ever know. Now note, it does not necessarily mean doing expensive things or buying her chocolate or flowers. It's just showing your wife in as many consistent, creative ways that she is the most important and desirable person you will ever know. Now here are 6 tips for husbands to become more romantic. First of all, husbands should be spontaneous. Surprise her with a gift or with a twirl or a hug or a kind action. Do something spontaneous for her. Secondly, husbands should be creative. Don't always do the same thing. For some of us, we need to spend some time thinking and planning and getting counsel and researching to be creative because we are boring. But, with the time of Google, no husband has an excuse not to be creative. Thirdly, husbands should be learners to be romantic. Thus, be constantly observing and making notes about what pleases your wife. Also note here that your wife will change and thus your observation list on how you can romance her should change as well and should continually be updating. Also, there might be seasons in your life that she would appreciate it if you spend some more time with the kids, more than even spending time with her. And then a 4th tip on romancing your wife is husbands should take initiative. Don't let your wife come up with a plan for the date night, for example. You choose the restaurant and where to go. 5th, husbands must praise their wives privately and in public. Like the excellent wife is praised by her husband at the end of Proverbs 31, right? The kids first charm or blesses the mother, and then the husband says, now I'm going to show you how to do it. And the husband praises his wife in public. 6th tip on romancing your wife is husbands should get advice from friends. How wonderful it would be if husbands shared ideas of loving their wives at Bryce. So how did you love your wife lately? And let's share ideas and practical tips that will stir your creativity also. Now, there are 5 threats of romance that Gary Ricucci mentions here. First of all, ignorance. Husbands should realize that going into marriage, they probably have no idea about romance and should therefore be humble learners. In fact, they have probably been misguided by the world in many areas, and they have to retrain their minds and also ask their wife, get their wife's input, because before marriage they couldn't do that, right? On romance. Secondly, selfishness is a big threat to romance. Even sex and romance can be done for selfish purposes. This becomes obvious to your wives and she will resist it. Thirdly, busyness is a threat to romance. Husbands should prioritize romance by planning for it. And in the end, we all just do what we desire, remember. So either we're afraid of losing something or we want to get something. So prioritize it, show that it's a priority by placing it in your schedule. And then fourthly, bitterness is a threat to romance. Unforgiveness robs you of romance, so settle conflicts quickly. And fifth, pride, thinking that you know it all and can't learn. That's a big threat to romance. A husband should continually be asking and learning and growing in his ideas on how to be more romantic, and especially towards his wife. Now, here are 10 practical things, very practical things that a husband can do for his wife. First of all, little gestures, wiping benches, opening doors, holding hands. Secondly, date night. Take initiative to organize a babysitter and choosing an activity to do together. Thirdly, weekend getaways. This should not be the only time you have fun together, but can feel the romance. Fourthly, celebrations and traditions. Maybe have a marriage tradition that you do every year. Fifth, resources for romance. Spend some money on romance by, for example, buying romantic music and perfume. 6, gifts. We can't all consistently buy our wives flowers, but we can spend some money to show her that we love her. Gifts must not be what she needs for her day-to-day work, but what she wants. Maybe what she's interested in or enjoys as a hobby. Thus, don't buy her a mop, but maybe a craft or a book. 7. Photographs. Putting photographs of our family members on our desktop or on our phone is a great way to feel the romance. Printing the photos and placing them in our office, for example. Also 8. Wish lists. Make a list of all the things your spouse likes and get them as time goes on. 9. Pet names. Calling her pet names can be a way that you show her she is special to you and that you are fond of her. Lastly, 10. Lasting memories. When you do something fun together, take photos, print them out, spend that little bit of extra money to make that moment memorable. Now, the last chapter deals with sexual intimacy. And here are 3 tips for Christian husbands to grow in sexual intimacy according to this book. 1. Know that it typically takes longer for the wife to become excited about sex than for the husband. Typically, men are almost always ready for sex, while women need some mental preparation. Thus, husbands will do well to prepare their wives for sexual intimacy long in advance. 2. Know that men and women are typically aroused differently. Typically, wives are aroused by words and kind deeds and later by touch, while men are aroused by sight and are almost always ready. Thirdly, husbands must realize that what works on one day will not necessarily work on another day. Husbands must always stay creative to arouse their wives sexually. Now, Betsy also gives 8 principles for women with regards to sex in marriage. 1, a woman is available, so she's not always too tired. When she sees her husband ready, she tries to place herself in the mood to grant him his desire to have sex. Secondly, she is carefree. She doesn't worry about how the kitchen looks like and the kids at that moment of sexual intimacy. Thirdly, she is attractive. Many ladies were very beautiful and attractive before they got married, but after they got married, they neglect their appearance. But a wife who really loves her wife and wants sexual intimacy to work tries to always be attractive. Fourthly, she's eager. She shows passion. She shows excitement about sex. She doesn't just say, okay, you can have it, here's my body. But no, she is eager for it. She is creative. She also tries to bring her in her mind and tries to make that sex act nice in her preparation for it and how she prepares things. 6, she is adventurous. She's not afraid of new stuff, except when it violates the conscience or is a clear sin. But she's not afraid of new stuff and new styles in the bedroom. 7, she is uninhibited. That means she's not holding back. She's just giving everything for that moment. And 8, she is aggressive. She's pursuing. She takes part with everything in her. Now, general advice to both husband and wife is that if you are struggling with sexual intimacy in your marriage, then know this. 1, you are not alone. Many couples are frustrated with their sex in marriage. 2, you need to talk about it. Don't let your pride get in the way of fulfilling sexual intimacy with your wife. Husbands, right? Talk with your spouse. Talk with another godly couple in church or with your pastor, assuming you're in a church which honors marriage, right? It does not just go away. You need to work on it. And then let me end off with the first chapter, the journey of a lifetime, where it all begins. And I'm ending this chapter, remember, because he asked you to reread this chapter and because of its helpful closing thoughts. So, first of all, just a few closing thoughts. 1, remember that marriage is an adventure. It's the journey of a lifetime. The excitement that you had at the start of your marriage can continue and grow throughout your marriage. But you need to work at it, and this book shows you how to. And therefore, I've placed a link to this book in the description box below. Now, here are some closing thoughts that he actually mentions in chapter 1, but he asks you to reread it at the end of the book. 1, change takes time. That if you have been convicted of a few areas in your marriage by this book, then start slowly, establish convictions from scripture and concentrate on becoming consistent in 1 or 2 areas at a time. 2, be patient with each other and yourself. Everything won't be fixed overnight or the moment you are done with this book. Even the most mature marriages still is consistent out of 2 redeemed sinners. Also, help each other change. Wives, don't despise your husbands for trying to change because of what they learn in a book, thinking it's not real. Remember, they have to start somewhere. And husbands, don't feel that you are fake because you're doing things that feel awkward or you're just doing exactly what the book says. Keep on trying and growing. your feelings will later match your intentions. Also, get other believers involved to keep you accountable and advise you on the details of your marriage that this book just can't get into. And then depend on God. Pray for God's help. Pray for God's forgiveness. Trust Him for a better marriage. Well, if you have found value, please remember to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. Also, remember a link to this book is in the description box below. I highly recommend you get it for yourself. And also, click on one of the other videos here on marriage and parenting. But until next time,